as demonstrated by health. We release this treatment to that perfect law, knowing so certainly that it is done, that we say together, and so it is. Alrighty, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I believe I solved the YouTube audio problems from last week with some new cables, and now it appears that I need a new headset for my phone. So we'll get there. Some of these things are more than 10 years old, so it's about time for them to be replaced. So this morning we are continuing with our discussion of Ralph Waldo Trine's ideas. And for those who indicated that you bought the book and you're reading the book, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I trust that you're getting a lot more out of what you're reading than I can discuss in a few minutes that we have together, because the book is very deep. But I want to take us back to where he started. And remember, today we are talking about the third chapter of his book, which is about the fullness of life. The fullness of life. Vigor, vitality, health, the fullness of life. Not just eking out a living, not just surviving, not just tolerating, but the fullness of life. And I'd like you to keep that idea in your mind, the fullness of life. Not just some, but the fullness of life is ours. So Trine started us off with a visualization. He started us off with this image of this beautiful lily pond. I would imagine, from the way he described it, it would be somewhere in California. Right? So you have the image of this reservoir up in the mountains of the cool water, the cool, clear, crystal mountain water, and it's flowing down the aqueducts that men have created, humans have created. And you can see this water as it's kind of rushing downhill, as gravity pulling it down the hill from the mountains down towards the city. As it passes through the farmland, outlets cut into the sides of the aqueduct called water gates. And there's a little round handle that you can turn, and when you turn it, there's a flat gate that goes up and down, and it controls the amount of water that flows out of that gate. And the image he gave us was that the man who owned the farm had that gate open, and the cool mountain water was flowing down through a little channel into a pond area, it was ponded up. And it was full of life. It was full of vegetation. It was full of fish. It was full of birds. It was full of bees. It was full of flowers. And the man had a generous nature, and he put a sign out on the road, and he said that the lily pond is open for all. So people would come out on the weekend for picnics, and they would partake of the beauty of the nature, right? It was a bee, there's something so that we can kind of feel something. And what happened was the man went away to another man, and that didn't want to pay. And it started to dry up, and the vegetation started to rot. And where in the beautiful odors and perfumes of the flowers, now there was the stench of the rotting vegetation. Where once people came to sit on a blanket and enjoy, and to picnic and to watch the children play, they didn't come any longer. And the cool water that flowed out of the pond down through the pasture and fed the animals that lived in the pasture, that stopped flowing as well. So he gives us that image, and I invited each and every one to find a way to create that image for yourself, to take time and do this visualization. Dr. Holmes says that a visualization can be a treatment in pictures, right? So you're impressing upon your subconscious mind something. What is it that you see? Can you see this flow of life? Can you feel this flow of life? Can you be there in that scene? You're part of it. Not that you're just an observer looking at it. Not that you're just the one imagining it. But can you actually feel yourself in that scene? Now, how much life is there in this image of the pond? The fullness of life is available, but it depends upon how wide the gate is open. The gate was closed off, of life was cut off. Life started to express itself in a different way. Once the gate is reopened, once the divine flow is restored, right, all of the things rotten come back to life. It flows away. It is washed away. Just by the of the cool mountain water coming in, right? This is very important to keep this in mind. No one has to go in there and get shovels and rakes and buckets and remove all that muck. All that was required for the beauty of that scene to restore itself was for the gate to be opened. For the gate to be opened. Everything else, nature knows how to do everything else. Nature knew how to do everything else. Everything else was taken care of. Everything else was taken care of. And over time, the fullness of life began to return to that pond. So please take some time today, if you haven't already done it, take some time today, and it would be good to take some time every day and create some sort of a visualization for yourself where you see in your mind's eye, where you see the fullness of life flowing into you, flowing through you. Remember the image, the visual of the Sufi dances with the right hand raised up higher than the left hand, the right palm facing up, the left palm facing down, and in that metaphor of what they are doing, in living that ritual, they are living the metaphor, and they are in the flow of life. The goodness of love comes in from above and through the right hand, goes through them and comes out the left hand and blesses the world. And they are in that flow. They are in that flow of life. That's so important. You cannot receive more than you will give. You cannot contain it. And the example I use there is the breath. Once your lungs are full, you cannot inhale anymore. You must give. You must in order to give some more. So we are in this flow of life, you and I. We are in this flow of life, but we don't always recognize that. And because we don't always recognize that, we are at times like that pond when the gate is closed. We are closed off from all of the goodness, all of the perfection, all of the love, and all of the kindness of the divine. Remember again in his opening chapters, he said that our human experience, we have two separate components, or they appear to be separate. We have the purely physical and the human, and then we have the spiritual or the soul. Now the spiritual or the soul is always there, and it is always perfect, and it is always whole, and it is always complete. But the experience that we have in the human is not always perfect, is not always whole, is not always complete. And we say, well, why is that? How can it be that the love of God is right here, but I'm not experiencing this love in my life? And what Trine tells us is that our thoughts, our beliefs, these are the bridge. These constitute the bridge. To go back to the image of the pond, this is what determines how high we raise or lower that gate to allow the divine flow into and through our lives. So just as the water in the aqueduct is pure and pristine and cool and life, the water in the pond can be stagnant and rotting. See, it is doing so because the gate is closed. And what we want to do is we want to consider in our lives that what our spiritual growth is all about, what our spiritual practice is all about, is opening ourselves up to a greater flow of that which is trying to give itself through us, which has created us as its instruments of giving, but created us in such a way that we must cooperate. We must consciously cooperate. We must deliberately cooperate. Dr. Holmes tells us at times we must stubbornly cooperate. In spite of all appearances, we turn our mind to God. We turn our mind to love. So this is the setup that Ralph Waldo Trine gave us in the first 2 chapters of his book. And now he brings us to the third, which is the fullness of life, which is vigor, which is health, which is energy. Right? And he says if we start with the premise that life is spirit, life is God in action, then we can easily accept the idea that the degree to which we express life, the degree to which we receive from that which is already there, depends upon our opening to it, our receptiveness to it. Okay? In the New Testament theology, we're told gifts have been given. Right? We're also told that the Spirit in heaven knows what you need before you ask. But we are told to ask, believing in our hearts that we will receive. Well, if the gifts have already been given, and the Spirit knows what we need before we ask, why doesn't it just give it to us? You see? Why doesn't it just give us the gifts? Why do we have to ask? And why do we have to ask believing? We have to ask believing because that is our degree of receptivity. Spirit cannot give us any gift that we are not open to receive. Now it has given us life. Our heart beats, our lungs move, our organs digest our food. All of this is a gift that has been given without our need to consciously accept. Spirit has evolved a creature, us, up to the point of our becoming self-aware. Right? So we as human beings, we have the ability to be aware of thinking, to be aware of thoughts, and to choose our thoughts, to choose which thoughts we will act upon, to choose which thoughts we will ignore. I want you to think about how much is going on in the world, and now that we have our smartphones with us at all times, and we have we have all kinds of electronics to tell us what to do, you know. We have so much information coming at us constantly, all the time. We have information coming to us that it's really not possible for us to absorb everything, to pay attention to everything. In fact, there's some studies now that indicate that the attention span of humans is shortening. We as a species are less and less able to concentrate because our mind is so used to flitting from here to there to everywhere. And I want you to think about the consequences of that, right? Because for our spiritual growth, what we are doing is we are learning to ignore that monkey mind, as we would get from the East, right? The monkey mind is everywhere. It wants to distract us. It wants to take us here, there, and everywhere. But the truth that we are exploring, the truth that we wish to experience, the presence and the activity of the divine is beyond that monkey mind. It is on the other side of that monkey mind. Sometimes you hear it described as the veil. There's a veil that separates us from the divine. And in our spiritual practice, what we are doing is we are learning to focus our attention on the presence. And if the monkey mind distracts us, it's hard for us to do that. And so this is why it is so important when we start to teach beginning single point meditation. It's just very simple. Inhale through the nose and intone Om. And then exhale and say one. And if you don't want to use Om, use love or use peace. Whatever brings you comfort, whatever brings you closer to the experience of God. And you just simply do that from 1 to 5, and then go back to 1. And the reason this is such a powerful technique is because as we start to do that, we become aware of how distracted our monkey minds are. We do 1, we do 2, and then we think about something else. And all of a sudden we realize, hey, I'm not counting anymore. Come back to 1. Come back to 1. This is why it's so important, because it makes us aware of the fact that the monkey mind is everywhere. The second thing it does for us is it makes us aware of the fact that we don't have to be distracted by that monkey mind. The monkey mind may still be chattering away in the background, but it does not keep us distracted to the point where we lose count. Right? And the importance of this is, what are we trying to do? We are trying to move from the world of appearances into the world of being, into the world of isness, into the world of suchness. To the degree that we do that, we open the floodgate. We open and allow more of the presence and the activity of the divine to flow into our lives. So what Trine asks us to consider is that just like this water up in the aqueduct is pure, it is perfect, the life of the divine is pure and it is perfect. It knows nothing of sickness. It could not know anything of sickness. Right? Remember what the divine knows the divine is. The divine says, let there be a universe, there's a universe. There is this power that is part of itself that acts upon its thoughts, on its beliefs, and brings it about. So if the divine believed in sickness, the divine would be sick. If the divine believed in struggles, the divine would be struggling. And that would be completely the opposite of perfect peace, of perfect love, of all wisdom, of all power, you see. So we have to start with clarifying our concept of God. Remember, every January 1st, we go back to what's your concept of God? Every January 1st. What is your concept of God? Because it is the most important concept in your life. The rest of your life is determined by that concept. And the concept of God is that God knows sickness and sends sickness, and God sends struggle, and God sends war, and God has enemies, then that is the kind of life that we will lead. That is the experience of life that we will have. So Trine brings us back and says, we have to examine this. We can be aware of what we are thinking. We can be aware of what we believe. And we can be aware even of what we believe at a level below our conscious awareness. We'll call it a subliminal level. I don't know if you remember back in the 50s and the 60s, they were talking about the movie theaters, the drive-in theaters, inserted a frame that said, buy popcorn or something like that. But it was up so quick on the screen that the conscious mind couldn't pick it up. But nevertheless, the story goes, whether it's true or not, I don't know. The story goes that when they did that, the popcorn sales at the concession stand went up. There's a part of us that is aware, but we are not consciously aware that we are aware. And this is what mindfulness meditation and mindfulness training is about, is becoming aware of the things that are going on that have an impact on our life, on the decisions that we make, but we are not necessarily aware of them? Can we bring our awareness more fully to what is going on within us? Right? Because as I said, there's so much going on that we can't take it all in. We have to use our ability to choose, to discern. What are we going to let in? What are we going to let in? How much are we letting in that is from the divine source, from the flow that we're talking about? And how much of it is from the human side? From the fear, from the doubt, from the anger, from the hate, from the belief in sickness, the necessity of sickness, from the belief in the need to be punished and all of these different things. And we want to turn our mind away from the problems, and we want to turn our mind to God. So we start with the premise then that the divine is already perfect, it is already whole, it is already complete, and it is all presence, which means it is right where we are. It is expressing its life as us. But the degree to which we express that life requires our conscious cooperation. Evolution has brought life to the point where we have become self-aware. We human beings have become self-aware. And in order for us to evolve any further, to enter, as Thomas Troward calls it, the fifth kingdom, the spiritual kingdom, requires our conscious cooperation. Life has taken, Holmes tells us this, life has taken us as far as it can take us. For the human race to evolve further requires us to consciously cooperate. So once we kind of accept these basic principles, then we can start to see how, by changing our thinking, we change our life. By opening ourselves more to the flow, we can experience a fuller life, physical health. Remember, dis-ease means the absence of ease. Ease is the normal state. Health is the normal state. Dis-ease is when something is out of balance. There is never disease in the mind of God. And if we are experiencing disease in our physical bodies, then the way to deal with that is to open ourselves more fully to the flow. So Trine he gives us that setup, that says, okay, God is perfect. God has created us out of itself. Part of us is perfect. Part of us doesn't know that yet. What we're trying to do is open ourselves up more fully to that, not only that knowledge, through the intellectual knowledge, the explanation I just gave, excuse me, but to the actual experience of it. But then he goes on to say, well, maybe you need more convincing that your states of mind can control the physical nature of your body. And he goes on to give us examples, which I know that you've heard many times over, and they just simply show that as at a pure psychological level, not even at a spiritual level, not at a metaphysical level, but at a pure psychological level, we know that emotions, thoughts, beliefs, we know that these things create a physiological change in our bodies. And the simplest one might be if somebody says something that embarrasses you, you flush, your cheeks turn red, right? There's a physiological change in your body. Why? Why did this physiological change take place? Something within your mental makeup reacted, and that thought or that emotion created a physical change in your body. Sometimes the example we use, you've seen it with in the R-gang comedies, or somebody, one of the kids has to get up and give a speech, and the other one takes a lemon and sits in the front row, and sucks on the lemon. I'm going to get a drink of water here. So the one kid gets up to give a speech, and the other one sits in the front row and just starts sucking on the lemon. And of course, the one trying to give the speech, his mouth gets all puckered up and he can't talk. If we are asleep and we are dreaming and we have a frightening dream and something is chasing us, for example, our heart will beat faster, our breathing will change, our legs may even be running while we are in our sleep. And what is going on is all entirely within our mind. For lack of a better word, in our mind. It's within our thoughts. So we know just at that level there that what is going on within our mental makeup affects physically our bodies, right? So we start sometimes. I ask the question, which came first, consciousness or matter? So to the materialist, matter came first. Somehow the matter, the chemicals created life out of themselves. That created consciousness out of itself. And then that consciousness that we continue to create. We build buildings, we do all those kind of things. But the spiritual view is that consciousness is what created matter. In the beginning, there was God, and God said, let there be, and then there was. So there was nothing, and then the divine said, let there be, and then there was. Right? So this is the idea that consciousness creates matter. That matter is subject to the direction of consciousness. And if we just look at these little examples, these little simple examples here, we can see that this matter that is our body, our blood pressure, or the flushing of the cheeks and all these kind of things, the puckering of our mouth at the sight of a lemon, that all of these physiological reactions are reactions to mental activity. So even if you're not considering the spiritual activity, at just a psychological level, you can see that thoughts affect our bodies. And over time, what we're told is that over time, if we are constantly aggravated, if we are constantly irritated, if we are constantly angry, if we're constantly afraid, and all of these things, it affects the chemical composition of the bodies, and we develop illnesses. This is kind of the not psychosomatic. This is, kind of the body-mind connection. So even if we just work at the pure level of psychology, many years ago, this is back in the 70s, before I even knew anything about Dr. Ernest Holmes or Science of Mind, but I was reading a book, and it was all about how the ideas influenced the health. And the example the author gave was of a person who was an adult, and they had a terrible nagging cough. And it wouldn't go away, and the doctors could not find a reason, a physical reason for this cough. So they sent this person to the psychologist. Excuse me, I had to get another drink of water. And the psychologist worked with them and was able to regress them back in time to when did this first start, And it first started when the person was a child, and they were very, very ill. And this was back in the days when doctors made house calls, and the family called the doctor to the home, and the doctor went into the bedroom and examined the child, and then went out into the hall to tell the parents what the doctor thought. And the doctor said, he's never going to get over this. He's never going to get over this. And what the doctor meant was the doctor thought that the child was going to die. But he didn't die, and he didn't know what the doctor meant. So there was a part of the child who was very sick when he heard this, who accepted this as the truth of his being, that he's never going to get over it. And he kept that cough his whole life. So the psychologist was able to help this person realize that the doctor didn't mean that he needed to have that cough the rest of his life. The doctor was trying to explain to the parents that he didn't expect the child to live, but the child did in fact live, and there was no reason for him to have to carry that cough with him. And with that understanding, the cough went away. So this is just an example of how, from a purely psychological level, we know that the states of our mind affect the states of our body and can affect our susceptibility to illness and disease and chronic conditions and all those sorts of things. So if we needed any convincing, we can look to things like that, and we can say, well, yeah, I accept the fact that what's going on in my body is a reflection of, or an effect of, my thoughts. So here's where we kind of get into some interesting areas. So from a metaphysical point of view, we would say that the idea is even amplified because there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. And if we are constantly believing in the necessity of sickness, if we are constantly believing in the necessity of disease, and it's very easy for us now with this pandemic going on to say, oh, well, a certain percentage of people are going to get sick, a certain percentage of people are going to die. We get those statistics all the time that are functioning purely from the physical side of the equation, not looking at the spiritual side of the equation. So what we have to do, what we recognize then, is that the human race consciousness, as Dr. Holmes called it, the collective unconscious, as Carl Jung called it, we are all immersed in that. Right? We all live in that. We all come from that. It is around us at all times, and we at times get that on us. It's like we're swimming in a mud puddle, and we get some on us, and we get sick. So the problem that we have is, once people start to realize that the state of their beliefs can affect the state of their physical bodies, then if there's an ailment in the physical body, they say, well, what was I thinking to cause that? What was I thinking to cause that? Remember Spalding Gray, the comedian, he did a monologue one time, and he had a sty in his eye or something in his eye, and he said that he was really getting tired of his metaphysical friends asking him what he didn't want to look at, Now we do that. You can even buy little booklets. You can buy little booklets that are published by spiritual teachers that will say, well, if you have a problem with your knee, it's because you're resisting some sort of a change, and if you have a problem with this, with your back, well, it's because you're not feeling supported, and all those kind of things. Excuse me. Now there may be some truth to those things. There may not be. And I think at one time Dr. Holmes actually, in the back of the textbook, you can see he has some physical conditions in the most likely areas of consciousness that are associated with them. But I think later in his teachings, he kind of got away from that. And he said it's not important for us to know what particular idea is associated with which particular ailment. What is important for us to know is that there is anything there that is less than the perfection of God, the perfect action of God. Then what we want to do is open that gate a little bit further. He went on to say that we'll never know, that we are such complex human beings that there's never likely one particular cause, like the example I gave you of the man who carried the cough with him his whole life. It was traced back to that one incident in his childhood. Most of us will never know. We'll never know. We'll never be able to figure it out. So we shouldn't waste time. So the example that we get there is, if you take a glass of water, like I have a glass of water here, if you take a glass of water and you put a few drops of ink into it, the ink will diffuse through the whole glass. It's impossible to get that ink out. I mean, you can't reach in there with your fingers and grab the ink and take it out. But if you put the glass underneath the tap and you just let a trickle of fresh water come from the tap, over time, the ink in the glass will be dispersed. Over time, it will be flushed out. So what he's telling us then is, and this is very important, I think, for people to remember, because sometimes people will come to me for treatment work and they say, I want to know what the cause of this is. I want to know what I was thinking that caused this particular ailment in my body. And here's their line of reasoning. If the affliction of their body is the effect of something that some thought that they're holding or some belief that they're holding, if they don't go in and root out that thought or that belief, well, then they'll continue to suffer the ailment. That's the thinking process. And my answer to that is, you're never going to find it. You may, but most likely you're not going to find it. And if you did find it, how are you going to root it out? And the process by which you're going to root it out is one of replacement, you see. Just like replacing the inky water in the glass with fresh water. So rather than trying to get your hoe out and go into your mind and take the weeds out of your thinking, a better approach is to open your floodgate a little bit further. Because just like in the example we gave in the opening imagery, right? If that floodgate is reopened and the cool, fresh water is allowed back into the pond, the intelligence of life will know what to do to restore itself. So rather than to try to sit around and think, well, gee, you know, this elbow hurts a little bit. I wonder what thoughts go with elbows and what I need to do. What we want to do is we want to take time every day joyfully celebrating the activity of God in, as, and through our physical bodies. Now, most of us don't do that. We don't do enough of that. Right? I mean, just look at physical exercise. How many people do enough physical exercise every day? And the physical exercise is good and it is important. And we need to do that. That's putting our bodies into motion. But even more important is getting our mentality right, you know. Are we exercising because there's a drudgery that we have to force ourselves to do so that we have enough energy to get through the day? Or is it a celebration of the very magnificent structure that this human body is? So what we are being asked to do is to first of all recognize that there is no sickness in the mind of God. There never has been. There never can be. There never will be. The divine is perfect. It is whole. It is complete. We are given this example in many teachings in many different ways, you know. From the East, we're asked to consider that a beam of light can pierce the darkness for miles, you know. You can see somebody holding a lantern up on a hillside miles away. And the light is not affected by the darkness. Doesn't know anything of darkness. You know, if we consider the earth, where I live now, it's daytime. But on the other side of the earth, it's nighttime. But the sun is still shining. And the sun is still perfect light. And it is totally unaffected by the experience of the darkness that people on the other side of the earth are having. It doesn't know anything of that darkness. It doesn't see that darkness, you know. We used to love to go down to the beach at sunrise. In fact, excuse me, the picture I send out on the email is of a sunrise meditation we used to do for the peace service. I just love to hear to see the sun come up over the horizon, you know. And it's almost like you can hear that music I can't remember the movie about the angels, I'm trying to think of who was in it. Meg Ryan, and I'll think of it later. But the angels used to go to the beach at sunrise and sunset, and they would hear music. They would hear the music. Nicolas Cage and Meg Ryan. But there's no struggle, you see. There's no struggle when the darkness goes away. The darkness doesn't put up a big fight. The darkness doesn't yell and scream and argue with the sun. See, the darkness was never an entity that had a power to sustain itself in the first place. The darkness is a condition that only existed where the sunlight was blocked. Think about that. The darkness is an experience, a condition. It is not first cause, it is a condition, it is an effect that only exists where the light has been blocked. If we start to think of the health of our bodies in that same fashion, excuse me, then wherever there appears to be disease, lack of ease, it is because the ease has somehow been blocked. Now as I said, we will not know. We will not be able to go in and find that exact switch and say, oh, this is it. This traumatic event that happened when I was 5 years old, that is it. That is what blocked the flow of ease through my circuits. We may, but more likely we may not. But we don't have to. We don't have to find the particular instance. As I say, we've been swimming in the mud of race consciousness and we got some on us. I love Joel Goldsmith's teaching. He says, don't ever personalize evil. Evil being the place where the good is restricted, not an entity of its own. Don't ever personalize the experience. Just say to yourself, I'm a human being. I've been swimming in the mud puddle of race consciousness and I got some on me. And how do I get it off of me? I turn my mind away from the problem and towards God. So every day in our spiritual practice, every day we want to take some time to just feel ourselves in that flow. Feel ourselves in that flow. Excuse me again. And it's important to remember it's a flow. It's not like we're just going to receive it and we're going to keep it all bottled up. We are an instrument of God's self-givingness. We have one hand turned up to receive and one hand turned down to give. So with this fullness of life that we are receiving, to put ourselves into the flow of this fullness of life, what are we giving? What are we giving? How do we open ourselves up? Can you imagine that pond if the pond had no outlet and they just kept building a dam higher and higher and higher and higher and higher? There'd be no giving. There'd be no beauty downstream of that pond because there'd be nothing flowing out of it. And we are here to be God's channels, God's instruments through which the givingness can flow. God loves others by means of me. God loves me by means of others. How today are we going to express the fullness of life that is flowing into us? How are we going to open ourselves up to give more of that? How can I be God's instrument of love more fully today? And it doesn't require, some big grand scheme, that says I'm going to go out and raise $10 million and build a hospital. And you can do that. You can do that if you set your mind to it. You can do that. But how am I going to be a better expression of love, of life, of truth, of beauty in everything that I do this day? Dr. Holmes tells us, before you do anything, ask yourself, does it give a greater expression to life, to love, to truth, to beauty? And hopefully you're going to answer yes to at least one of those. And he says, does it harm anyone in any way? Does it take anything away from another? And if you answer no to both of those, then do it. Then do it. There's nothing in the world against it. There's nothing in the universe against it. And that's the simple morality of life. You know, it was Augustine who said, finally we have one commandment, love and do what you will. Love and do what you will. Can we open ourselves up to be a greater expression of love today? Can we recognize that we are the inlets who may become outlets of the divine? Can we recognize that as this flow moves through our life, as it comes in the right hand and goes out the left, can we recognize that as we enter that flow of life more fully, that everything that needs to dissolve within us dissolves and moves out of us? That the consciousness of the divine, the mind that created these bodies, knows perfect health, and as more of that flows into us, then the things that don't need to be here flow out of us. We want to recognize then that health is our normal, natural state. That opening ourselves up to more fully to the flow, to the experience, and to the love of God improves our health. Now, does this mean that we never go to a doctor? That we never take medicine? No, it does not, you see. It does not. Frederick Bales. I think we're going to talk a little bit about Bales next week in Your Mind Can Heal You. He said, if taking the aspirin gives you relief, take it. But recognize that the source of your health is God. Recognize that the source of your health is God. The source of your life is God. The source of your vitality is God. Our spiritual growth is opening ourselves up more fully to the flow of the divine through us. And the only place that we can do that is in our thoughts, in our consciousness. We can direct our consciousness. We can direct that part of ourself to dwell upon the perfection and the love and the kindness of God. We can recognize that it is flowing through every cell, every organ, every tissue, every function of these bodies. We can recognize that anything within us that is unlike the love of God is now gone, is now leaving, is now dissolving into the nothingness from which it came, just as the night dissolves into the nothingness from which it came when the sun comes over the horizon. Excuse me. So let's let today be a new sunrise for health in our life. Let's let today be a day when we turn our attention to God, we turn away from our problems, and we just simply ask this question and wait for the answer. How can I love more fully today? How can I serve today? How can I be a greater expression of the goodness and the kindness and the perfection and the love of that which has created me for that purpose? Let's open ourselves up to be better outlets. Let's know that as we focus on that, we are opening ourselves up to be better inlets, and that as the divine flow increases through our body, everything else starts to take care of itself. You are God's instruments of love, and so it is. Alrighty then, let's see.